Imagine having a simple, colorful mailbox, nothing offensive, just a little personality in an otherwise cookie-cutter neighborhood. Now imagine your HOA Karen neighbor decides it's too bright and demands you repaint it to fit the community standards. She filed complaints. She left passive-aggressive notes. She even tried to fine me. So I did exactly what she asked. I repainted it, but with an optical illusion design that looks like a giant middle finger. Perfectly legal, perfectly HOA compliant, and perfectly impossible for her to ignore. What happened next? Let's just say Karen's meltdown was visible from across the street. Before we dive into this petty masterpiece, don't forget to like, subscribe to Tailflow, and drop a comment if you've ever had to deal with an HOA Karen. It all started with a mailbox, a simple, harmless mailbox. I wasn't trying to make a statement or ruffle any feathers. I just thought the standard gray metal mailboxes in our HOA-controlled neighborhood were, well, boring. So one sunny weekend, I decided to add a little personality. Armed with a can of bright turquoise paint and a few white swirl stencils, I transformed my dull mailbox into something cheerful, colorful, and eye-catching. It wasn't neon. It wasn't covered in offensive graffiti. Just a vibrant pop of color in a sea of dull gray. Neighbors walking by gave me compliments. Love the color. It really brightens up the street. Even the mail carrier grinned and said, "Hey, nice mailbox. Makes my route less boring." But, of course, not everyone was a fan. Enter Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed HOA president, the kind of person who treats minor inconveniences like they're federal crimes. A day after I finished painting, I noticed her standing at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, glaring at my mailbox like it had personally offended her. She didn't say anything right away. Just stared, and then she took out her clipboard. Because, of course, she had a clipboard. The next morning, I found a bright pink envelope taped to my front door. Inside was an official-looking letter from the HOA. Notice of violation. Your mailbox color does not comply with HOA-approved standards. It must be repainted to an approved color within 14 days to avoid fines. I stared at it, genuinely confused. Approved color? Was there some secret rulebook I'd missed that banned happiness? Later that day, I spotted Karen outside. Figured I'd go straight to the source. "Hey, Karen," I called, holding up the notice. "What's this about?" She turned, squinting like she was inspecting a biohazard. "Your mailbox," she snapped. "It's not an approved color. The HOA guidelines clearly state mailboxes must be neutral, black, white, or gray." I blinked. I don't remember seeing that in the handbook. Karen's face tightened. "Well, it's an unwritten rule. It's about maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetic." Ah, yes, the famous unwritten rule. The ultimate Karen power move. I could have argued. I could have pointed out that her plastic pink flamingos were more unsightly than my cheerful mailbox. But instead, I smiled. "Got it. I'll take care of it." That night, I sat on my porch, staring at my mailbox, thinking. Sure, I could repaint it gray like she wanted and be done with it. But where's the fun in that? Then an idea hit me. Karen wanted me to repaint the mailbox. Fine, I'd repaint it. But I'd do it in a way that was completely legal, technically compliant, and guaranteed to make her regret ever complaining in the first place. I spent the next few days researching HOA regulations, city codes, even USPS mailbox rules. And you know what I found? As long as the mailbox wasn't reflective, didn't contain offensive language or explicit imagery, and met safety requirements, I could paint it however I wanted. That's when I discovered the magic of optical illusions. I found a design that, when viewed from certain angles, especially from Karen's porch, looked like a giant, unmistakable middle finger. But up close, it was just a bunch of abstract geometric shapes. Nothing offensive, nothing inappropriate, just art. The next weekend, I got to work. Karen, naturally, was outside gardening, but really just supervising the neighborhood with her trademark scowl. She sauntered over, smug as ever. "Glad to see you're fixing it," she chirped. "Oh, absolutely," I said, suppressing a grin. Wouldn't want to violate any unwritten rules. It took me hours to get the design just right, carefully layering shapes, adjusting shadows, and fine-tuning the angles. Up close, it looked like a modern art piece, just random lines and colors. But if you stood about 30 feet back, right from Karen's front steps, it was perfect. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, waiting. Right on schedule, Karen stepped outside to fetch her mail. She glanced at my mailbox, did a double take, and froze. She squinted, tilted her head, took a few steps back, and then her face morphed from confusion to pure, unfiltered rage. She marched across the street, fists clenched. "That's inappropriate," she snapped. I looked at the mailbox, feigning confusion. "Inappropriate? It's just an abstract design. Do you see something else?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because what could she say? "It looks like a giant middle finger." She'd sound insane. Without another word, she stomped back to her house, slamming the door so hard I swear the windows rattled. Mission accomplished. The next few days were even better. Neighbors started stopping by, curious about the art. Kids pointed and said, "Cool design." Even the mail carrier chuckled. "Looks different from up close, huh?" he said with a wink. Karen, meanwhile, was stuck in a perpetual state of passive-aggressive fury. She'd glare at the mailbox every time she passed by, probably debating if she could file another complaint. Spoiler, she did. And that's when the real fun began. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat, especially not over something as trivial as a mailbox. While I enjoyed watching her seethe in silence for a few days, I knew it was only a matter of time before she escalated things. And sure enough, one morning, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. Notice of violation. Your mailbox displays inappropriate imagery that violates community standards. You are required to repaint it within 14 days to avoid fines. There it was. Karen's next move. She wasn't going to argue with me anymore. She was bringing in the big guns, the HOA board. Instead of getting annoyed, I was actually kind of excited. I knew my mailbox didn't break any rules. I'd done my homework. No offensive language. No explicit imagery. Just an abstract design that happened to trigger Karen's imagination. But I wasn't going to walk into that HOA meeting empty-handed. So I gathered my evidence, photos of the mailbox from different angles, showing how abstract it looked unless viewed from the exact spot Karen always stood. A copy of the HOA guidelines, which, surprise, surprise, said nothing about optical illusions. And just for fun, I printed out some similar abstract art from famous artists, in case Karen wanted to argue that art was a violation. The HOA meeting was held at the community center, a small overly beige room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. When I arrived, Karen was already there, sitting front and center with her clipboard and a stack of papers, looking like she was about to prosecute me for war crimes. The board members, 5 people who probably regretted volunteering for this, looked tired before the meeting even started. The HOA president cleared her throat. "All right, we're here to discuss a complaint filed regarding a mailbox design that allegedly violates community standards." Karen shot out of her seat like she'd been launched. She started her presentation with a dramatic flair of a courtroom drama. "This mailbox," she declared, waving around a printed photo, "is offensive. It's inappropriate. It's clearly designed to mock me personally." The board members squinted at the photo. One of them tilted his head. Another leaned forward, clearly trying to figure out what she was so upset about. I sat there, completely calm, waiting for my turn. When Karen finally ran out of steam, the HOA president turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I stood up, holding my neatly organized folder. "With all due respect, I believe this is a misunderstanding. The design is abstract art. There's nothing offensive about it unless you're looking for something that isn't there." I handed out copies of the photos I'd brought, showing how from most angles, it was just colorful geometric patterns. I even added, art is subjective. What one person sees is up to their own interpretation. The room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the board members, a guy named Tom, who'd always seemed pretty reasonable, chuckled softly. "I mean, it just looks like modern art to me." A few people in the room nodded. Karen's face turned bright red. After some back and forth, the HOA president gave her ruling. Since the mailbox doesn't violate any specific guidelines and contains no offensive language or explicit content, we find no grounds to require its removal or modification. In other words, Karen lost. She tried to argue, of course. This is ridiculous. It's clearly meant to offend me. The HOA president sighed. Karen, we can't regulate how you feel about a mailbox. We deal with rules, not personal grievances. Boom. Game over. After the meeting, as people filed out, I overheard snippets of conversation. All that fuss over a mailbox? Karen really needs to chill. Honestly, it's kind of funny. Karen stormed out without looking at anyone, clutching her clipboard like it was the last shred of power she had left. I walked home with a grin on my face. Not just because I'd won, but because now every time Karen saw that mailbox, she'd know the entire neighborhood was in on the joke. You think after losing at the HOA meeting, Karen would have finally accepted defeat. But no, Karen doesn't go down without a dramatic last stand. After the meeting, she went quiet for a few days, which honestly made me more suspicious than relieved. Because when a Karen goes silent, it's not peace. It's planning. One morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox, not from the HOA this time, but from the city's code enforcement office. Apparently, there had been an anonymous complaint about an inappropriate and non-compliant mailbox. Gee, I wonder who could have sent that. The letter claimed my mailbox violated city ordinances, and that an inspector will be coming by to assess the situation. I almost felt bad for the poor city employee who'd have to waste their time on this nonsense. Almost. A few days later, a city code enforcement officer pulled up in a white utility vehicle. I greeted him with a smile. Let me guess, you're here about the mailbox? He chuckled. Yeah, we got a complaint. Seemed a little odd, but I've got to check it out. I showed him the mailbox, explained the situation, and even handed him the HOA's decision, just for good measure. He walked around, took a few photos, and then turned to me with a smirk. Well, it's within city guidelines. No safety hazards, no explicit content, and it meets the size and placement requirements. I raised an eyebrow. So, it's legal? Completely. Then he leaned in slightly. Off the record, it's pretty clever. We both laughed, and he left without filing any violations. Apparently, Karen had been watching the entire inspection from behind her blinds because not even an hour later, she stormed over to my front yard. Face red, fists clenched, clipboard in hand, because of course she brought the clipboard. This isn't over, she barked. I've done everything by the book, and you're just mocking me. I stayed calm. Karen, the HOA said it's fine. The city said it's fine. Maybe it's time to let it go. She opened her mouth to argue, but right then Mr. Thompson, my elderly neighbor, who had been watering his plants, chimed in. Karen, it's a mailbox. Maybe you're the problem. The look on her face was priceless. She spun around, stomped back to her house, and slammed the door so hard I'm surprised the windows didn't shatter. After that, things got interesting. Apparently, Karen's antics had become the neighborhood's favorite form of entertainment. And what do bored neighbors do when they find a common enemy? They join in. Within a few weeks, my neighbor Jenna painted her mailbox with a rainbow swirl design. Tom added bold stripes to his. Even Mr. Thompson slapped a sticker on his mailbox that said, "This is not a Karen-approved mailbox." It turned into a full-blown movement, the Mailbox Rebellion. Karen? She had to walk past them every single day. Eventually, Karen stopped complaining altogether. Not because she finally matured, but because she realized she'd lost control. Her clipboard became more of an accessory than a weapon. Her passive-aggressive notes stopped appearing, and she retreated into her house like a villain who'd been defeated, not by some grand battle, but by the very thing she tried to control. A mailbox. After Karen's dramatic meltdown and her failed attempt to involve the city, the neighborhood settled into an unexpected new normal. The Mailbox Rebellion wasn't just a petty joke anymore. It had become part of the community's identity. It's funny how something as simple as a mailbox can create ripple effects you never expect. The weeks following Karen's defeat were almost surreal. Mailboxes around a neighborhood transformed. Bright colors replaced dull gray. Creative designs popped up. Everything from bold stripes to polka dots to full-on landscape paintings. Someone even added googly eyes to their mailbox, which made me laugh every time I walked by. What started as my little act of rebellion turned into a symbol of freedom from HOA pettiness. The best part? The HOA board didn't say a word. After seeing Karen's crusade crash and burn, they weren't eager to pick up where she left off. As for Karen, She never tried to challenge me or anyone else again. She became a background character in the very story she tried to control. Her clipboard disappeared. Her passive-aggressive notes stopped. And every time she walked past my house, she'd glance at the mailbox, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. It was the ultimate silent defeat. She couldn't complain without sounding ridiculous, and she couldn't ignore it without feeling like she lost. Which, of course, she had. About 6 months after the HOA meeting, I decided to put the cherry on top. I installed a small solar light above my mailbox. Nothing fancy, just enough to make sure the abstract design was visible 24/7, even at night. Because why should Karen get a break after sunset? When she first saw the new light, I swear I heard her mutter something under her breath as she power walked past. It was the little victories that mattered. Looking back, the whole situation taught me a few valuable lessons. Bullies thrive on control. Karen's entire identity was wrapped up in enforcing rules, real or imagined. The second she lost that power, she unraveled. Know the rules better than the people trying to enforce them. Doing my homework saved me a lot of headaches. It's hard to lose when you're playing the game by the book, even if the other person is making up the rules as they go. Petty revenge is an art form. Sometimes the best way to deal with people like Karen isn't to argue. It's to out-petty them with style, grace, and a healthy dose of creativity. Community matters. What started as one person's battle turned into a neighborhood movement. People who'd never spoken to each other before bonded over colorful mailboxes and shared laughs at Karen's expense. Years later, that mailbox still stands, vibrant, unapologetic, and glowing under its little solar light. Karen still lives in the neighborhood, but she's just another face now, no more power, no more clipboard. And every time I see someone new move in and paint their mailbox a bold color, I smile. Because whether they know it or not, they're part of the legacy Karen accidentally created. She wanted control. But in the end, all she did was inspire a neighborhood to be a little bolder, a little brighter, and a lot less afraid of her petty rules. And that's how a simple mailbox turned into the ultimate symbol of HOA rebellion, and how one petty neighbor accidentally sparked a neighborhood-wide movement. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor like Karen? Or maybe you've had your own battle with an HOA that went way too far. Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video to support more HOA takedown tales. Subscribe to Taleflow for epic revenge stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next petty showdown. Thanks for watching, and remember, when life gives you a Karen, give her something colorful to look at. See you in the next one.